Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
Top Treasury officials are telling Congress that the IRS pulled off a remarkable feat, carrying out a busier-than-usual filing season with a much smaller workforce. But the Trump administration is still pursuing further workforce and budget cuts for the IRS next year. Officials overseeing the IRS say the agency's long-anticipated investments in technology are paying off, and its adoption of artificial intelligence and automation tools means the agency can do more with less. Federal News Network's Jory Heckman joins me now with more details. Jory, thanks for being here.
Hey, Terry. Great to be here.
Refresh us. What has the IRS been able to do with technology this year that it couldn't do before?
Well, the big one is, of course, the IRS doing the filing season with no major interruptions, with about 27% fewer employees than it did this same period last year. It did go through pretty substantial workforce reductions over the past year or so. And according to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, he says that the Treasury Department and the IRS are able to do this work because it's been able to have a breakthrough of sorts with some of its technology. He told members of the Senate Appropriations Committee that Democrats were ready to pounce on this filing season, saying it was going to be a disaster because of workforce cuts. And he says that it was, in fact, a home run. And he says that the IRS is now able to do things like, with this technology, flag potential errors or omissions in tax returns, giving taxpayers an opportunity to correct them before it falls on an IRS employee's plate to address them themselves. Here's what Bessent had to say about that.
We actually, using electronic filing, can go back to a taxpayer and say that you will likely be audited if you submit this tax return. Would you like to redo it in advance? And it comes back in a much more satisfactory status and prevents an audit, increases revenues.
Given what he's saying there and what you mentioned about the technology improvements, what does the 2027 budget proposal look like for the IRS?
It is cuts in personnel, it's cuts in funding. What they're asking for here is the Treasury Department is calling for a $1.4 billion budget cut from the IRS's current budget and eliminating about 2,000 positions from its total headcount. Now, these are not spread evenly across the IRS's many functions. In fact, taxpayer services would see a slight staffing increase, but IRS enforcement would bear the brunt of both the spending and workforce cuts.
What are outside experts saying about how the IRS is using its technology? Is it really capable of doing more with less?
Well, it's interesting. There was a roundtable recently with some of these experts before members of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. Individuals from the Government Accountability Office say that the Treasury Department and the IRS have actually published very little information on its current IT strategy and timelines for when it hopes to achieve some of what Bessent was describing. That early in the Trump administration, around March of 2025, Treasury actually announced that it was putting a pause on its multi-year IT modernization plan and was going to come back with more details. Those details have yet to arrive for anyone, including folks at GAO. And over at the Tax Policy Center, Janet Holtzblatt says that the IRS can't solely rely on these tech breakthroughs to meet its mission, that you're also going to need trained IRS employees to understand what the automation and the AI is saying.
We often talk about technology as being the answer. That technology can improve the provision of services and technology can improve the selection of audits and so forth. But what we miss in these discussions is the importance of people, the employees. You'll still need people to respond to the taxpayer once the system works more efficiently.
Jory, what are members of Congress saying about the budget as it is submitted for the IRS?
Well, we're still very much in the early stages of hammering out a comprehensive spending plan for fiscal 2027. But notably, Republicans on the House Appropriations Committee are more or less on board with the Trump administration's plan here. They've advanced a spending bill for the IRS that would give them about a $1 billion cut in appropriations, going from $11.2 billion to about $10.2 billion. So not quite as severe as the Trump administration's cuts, but still a substantial reduction in spending being proposed here. Democrats on the committee, as you might imagine, say that the agency shouldn't be cutting the federal government's accounts receivable until these are, proven things that the IRS can do with automation and with AI, and that these are still really early days for the IRS experimenting with this kind of technology. So don't cut the funding until this is something that is fully baked as far as an idea. Republicans on the committee, however, say that the IRS did demonstrate it could do its job, do its filing season, and still do that with substantially fewer employees.
The IRS IT systems have been a subject of horror stories for decades. Ancient code, nobody knows how to write it or maintain it anymore. And during the Biden administration, they got $80 billion in the Inflation Reduction Act to help address those tech challenges. What's the status of that money now?
It's substantially reduced. Starting out, it was $80 billion back in 2022 that the IRS could dip into to pull off some of its multi-year IT modernization goals and priorities. In this following years, Republican lawmakers have successfully clawed back a lot of that money. The overall pot of money is now something closer to $26 billion in funds that the IRS has available. And according to the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration, the IRS has already spent down about 60% of those remaining funds. And actually, by fiscal 2028, the IRS will deplete that money because it's had to take some of those Inflation Reduction Act funds and actually use those to cover some of its annual budget shortfalls, because Congress is shrinking its annual budget and having to dip into its multi-year modernization funds to address that. So by fiscal 2028, we'll see what the IRS has been able to accomplish, but it has been having to write these IOUs, and as a result has less money set aside for the original purpose of these funds.
This feels like a to-be-continued conversation.
Very much so.
That's Federal News Network's Jory Heckman. And Jory, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Terry.
You can find his story at federalnewsnetwork.com.